Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host. A lot of cool things going on here. I'm eager to bring you this episode because I feel like I got a new friend out of it. Dr. Miles Neale, thanks a lot for reaching out, for connecting, and for doing the work that you do. And this conversation was awesome. So I'll direct you to Dr. Miles Neale. His website is milesneale.com. Where is that thing? Yes. milesneale.com, milesneale.com. Check it out. Lots of cool stuff on there. A pilgrimage, psychotherapy. He's got a podcast. He's got a YouTube channel, and it is very rich. So go there. I watched a number of his videos, as I say in the interview, and I've referred a number of people to his videos because one in particular with the Reuben was really helpful for me to understand deeper aspects of Buddhism. Miles, thanks for the work you do. Thanks for this conversation, and I'm eager to continue to explore, as you all, as the listeners, will hear once you or see once you follow through with listening to the whole thing. Hope you do. As far as updates are concerned, I've got a cool class coming up at Esalen. So go to Esalen, ESALEN.org, and check out the class. The link to the class will be below, so you can check it out and not only register for the class, which will be February 28th through March 4th of this year, just outside of Big Sur in California. And also check out their website. Lots of really great classes that they're offering, great workshops, and a good place to stay for the week, weekend, or day. So thanks to Esalen. Appreciate you guys having me out, and I'm eager to teach that class. So come out and join us. It'll be fun. As far as that's concerned, I've got an episode coming up in the next few weeks with Jeffrey Kripal, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who's a dear friend, and it will be his third time on the podcast. And we'll be talking about Esalen. He's got this book, this one, Esalen, and it's marvelous. I'm reading it now. I'm making my way through, and we're going to talk about the religion of no religion and the birth of the counterculture in the West. Also from Miles, let me revisit that while I'm talking about books for a second. This is Miles's book, Gradual Awakening. It's one of the better Buddhist books I've ever read, but it's deeper than that. It's a kind of a guideline for how to create a practice and how to cultivate a deeper, richer inner life and spiritual path. So again, Jeff Kripal, Dr. Miles Neale. I've also got a class coming up at the Jung Center at junghouston.org, junghouston.org. Check them out. I'm involved with the Jung Center here in town, and it's a cool place to educate yourself. And you can check out classes not only in person, you can also do it online. So explore that website, links below. The Sacred Speaks is brought to you by the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences. It's a boutique integrative healing center that my wife and I created years ago. Check us out at thecenterforhas.com. And what else? There's one more thing. Let's see. Thankfully, there's editing that I can do on this podcast, so I can leave long pauses like that. Yes, the music. The music is Modern Nations. Check them out at modernnationsmusic.com. And other than that, as far as references or links, I think that's it for today. All I can say is that this conversation that you're about to see or listen to was, I just want to spend a moment with and just ooze gratitude because this process and project I've been doing for a little over 4 years, almost 5 years now, has been one of the most spiritually and intellectually enriching endeavors of my entire life. And I am so thankful for this process. I'm also thankful for you for being here. So thanks for any amount of hanging out that you do. Be sure to like and subscribe to it so that it can grow. But there is a kind of selfishness in this. I mean, I love this. I'm obsessed with this path, my own spiritual and intellectual path. So I appreciate the ability to do this. Thank you for participating, for those that participate in the interviews, and thank you for participating. Your comments, your engagement, and your presence is greatly and deeply appreciated. Be sure to share the link to Esalen to any individual that you think might either enjoy this workshop or enjoy a stay at Esalen. There's so many great activities and workshops and classes. it would be hard not to find something that would hit you right where you need to be hit. For now, I think that's it. You can be looking forward to the Sacred Series coming out. I keep saying this, but it's a hell of a lot of work to get this thing done, and I'm trying to get it right. So hopefully, I think we set a date for February. We'll see if that goal line gets pushed down the field anymore, but for now, February 1st or about in that vicinity. And for now, I just want to bring you this interview. So thank you, Dr. Neale, for your time, your energy, for your work, and thank you for being here. For now, we'll leave it there. Okay. Do you ever, I mean, sometimes I do that. When I used to play music, I would go and check my guitar on the stage and like, man, this isn't working. And the sound guy's like, plug your guitar in, dude. You know, yeah, okay. Yeah. Shit. Yeah, I did that, you know? Okay. So welcome, man. I'm so excited. As you and I were joking, like there's a kind of amorous connection that you and I have from afar, and so it's really nice to meet you, considering we've been emailing back and forth, and now I've been like reading your book, this one, and also listening and watching your work on YouTube, which is we'll get into that, but I'm really excited to explore with you today, Miles.
Likewise, John. Yeah, I think we both probably spent a lot of time in a little bit of a rabbit hole, or several of them. So it's always nice to come up for air and at the surface meet a like-minded fellow kindred inquirer, or you know, and a spiritual seeker. One thing I've really admired about your work in particular, and why I contacted you, was your interdisciplinary approach. I mean, we're both therapists, but we're really trying to bridge a number of different worlds amidst the psychedelic revolution. But spirituality is really important, trauma and psychology. So I think, you know, I've very much really admired your platform and what you're doing with your podcast, and of course the high caliber guests that you've invited. And but I think they're in a spirit of collaboration. I think this is we're really in a very monumental time, and it's going to take a lot of, you know, collaboration with colleagues to get clear about things. And so, you know, I'm very, very keen to do that with you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's you initiated, and I'm grateful you did. It's been exciting to get into your work. Just so we kind of hang a couple of our flags out. You know, I became basically obsessed with Buddhism when I was in my mid-20s, and just voraciously read. I mean, I read anything I possibly could get my hands on. I was a part of a sangha for a while. I had a Zen meditation teacher. He was a monk. And then I also have interviewed a couple of people on the podcast who Bob Roth is one of my meditation teachers, and he was kind of more in the Indian tradition of transcendental meditation. And I got to tell you, just to lead this off, you know, one thing that your work certainly does is, for me, and Buddhism, I think, did this in general. There are such amazing structures that Buddhism has, and it really does engender a sense of like, where's my practice? What's my practice? And I noticed that on my own personal experience, you know, I, as a psychotherapist, as a person who's really kind of trying to understand how people suffer and how we move through our suffering in our various life stages, I think to have a personal spiritual practice is maybe one of the antidotes to what you were talking about earlier. This, and why maybe these religious structures kind of come to the foreground in times of need, because we were reminded, you know, the three jewels, right? One of them is to have a kind of path, and this book certainly does it. But that's my general feeling about reading your work, is I initially kind of want to look around and organize my space and really get my ass on the cushion. So thank you for that kind of inspiration, because I don't take that lightly, and I want to take seriously the magic in our lived experience, and how you way over there can have an impact of my little sacred space in here. So now we get to open that up further. Thank you.
Yeah, let's do it. I can't wait. Life is short.
Yeah, amen, man. Well, I want to start with also, so I've already said that I've read your book. I've watched a number of the videos on your podcast or your YouTube series. One in particular was your talk at the Rubin in 2016 that I thought was very good. The kind of a basic exploration of the wheel of life, and then also an overview of Buddhism. So could you start just by what's your kind of your outer worldly who you is, and what interests you and drives you, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. I mean, I am a father, first of all, struggling with two little kids in the middle of a pandemic. So that's always a good, humbling place to start. And so never get too far ahead of myself, because if you're, on the cusp of any kind of lockdown with two kids, 7 and 5 or 7 and 4, it always shows you just how little you know.
Isn't that true? I think, is it Ram Dass or somebody that said, he was talking about if you ever think you're enlightened, go live with your parents for a weekend. But I also think if you're ever enlightened, just have a miniature, human being.
Have a couple of kids.
Have a couple of kids. Yeah. They will fuck with you.
So that's always a good place to start. They always show me my mind and how much more I have to learn. And, I also always have so much respect for my wife, who's got so much more integrity than I do. Oh,
I know. Yeah. I have a shared, I agree. My wife continues to show me what a badass really looks like.
Yeah. So on that note, with that a little bit of humility there, yeah, I mean, I'm a therapist by training. Like you, I went for some level of conventional training at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. But throughout my training, I've always been lockstep, following two parallel paths, one in Buddhism and one in psychology. And so in my Buddhist training is just as long, 25 years with some great teachers, Bob Thurman and Joe Luizzo, and the Tibetan lamas, Geshe Tenzin Zopa more recently, who's an enlightened master by my estimation. So I've been blessed to be a student, really a dutiful student, someone who's practiced a lot of guru devotion, someone who's allowed myself to get steeped in the tradition and not just be delighted or amused at the superficial level, but really commit. And I think the biggest part of my training background is spending 20 years as a mentee. The institution of mentorship is one that I think is really missing. And as academic institutions, as academia takes over the world, and something is missing from academia. Where we've gone too heavy on the intellect, and we've lost a lot of what it means to be around a master of a trade. It could be piano, it could be basket weaving, it could be carving, it could be boat making, it could be, house building. I learned more in 20 years of knocking my head up against a mentor than I did in 3 degrees of education. Mm-hmm. So my path really, and I just think that it was hard. It was really hard. I wanted to do things that I wasn't allowed to do. I was put in my place over and over again. I was asked to do things over and over and over again. It was old school. And it wasn't easy. But it was the best education I could ever have. And Joe Luizzo was a student of Bob Thurman, so I traced that lineage down from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Bob Thurman, of course, the first Westerner to become an ordained Tibetan Buddhist, chair of Indo-Tibetan Studies at Columbia University, and then his student, Joe Luizzo, who was a psychiatrist. And so, Joe was the one to really open the door for me to see what it would be like to fuse these traditions from the get-go. So right out of the gates in my training, these two traditions were woven together into a single, tapestry. I learned a really far out and unique language along the way. So, I mean, I think that really shaped my mind. I spent a lot of time in Asia. I grew up in Hong Kong. I was born in Singapore. I've traveled extensively throughout the Far East. And so again, life exposure and life experiences, living in monasteries, doing field research, living with monks, putting my head on pilgrimage sites that are 2,000 years old. I mean, these are all part of my background and training and have really, really informed who I am as a person and how I also see the world. So I wanted to just flash forward from this sort of training because, in a way, gradual awakening and my history with my teachers and fusing Buddhism with psychotherapy is almost like an old world to me. What brings me into the moment right now, of course, is the pandemic. And ever since the pandemic, this is a dark night of culture. This is the dark night of soul of culture. And I've just been, probably, you might share this with me, John, just that the different portals have opened that I never suspected or never anticipated. And I'm a curious seeker, so I've just ventured down into a number of different disciplines, including astrology and mythology and Jung and alchemy. And so, these have occupied my mind more recently, and with my background in 20 plus 25 years almost in Buddhism and psychology, that I feel like that just only just set up as a foundation. Like I think, and my work with trauma and my work with Buddhism, my work with psychotherapy, they really provided a really nice foundation. But now there's almost like building a scaffolding, which is what I really want to talk about with you, because that scaffolding, the more interdisciplinary it can become, the more broad and the more rich, the more I think we can capture a clearer picture of what's happening on the planet right now. And then with that, even with agency, where are we going to move? What are we looking at right now? What is actually happening right now, and where are we going? I think the more lenses that we can put on that, the better we're going to be.
And I guess that's one of the reasons why I responded so favorably, and I'm still responding so favorably to your lecture on the wheel, because it articulated such a structure of reality that really one can lean on. And it's got a mythic element. It holds the paradoxes. It looks at all the hells and the heavens. And so I think there's a fundamental question about what is to be trusted. And what you and I know on some level, and really everybody knows by experience, is how we respond to threat and what happens when we're feeling threatened. Whether it's a overt, acute issue, or it's something a little beneath the surface, like a latent issue, or Adam Grant's writing about languishing a whole lot right now. And I think that's an important image for us to keep in mind. Or cyclothymia, these things that are beneath the surface that aren't so acute, but they're low-level psychological and interpersonal and spiritual malaise that because of the lack of our kind of mythic structure, we fall back on resources that we never really initiated in the first place. So again, will you talk a little bit about that? Like what is your structure and how you came to it? Kind of let's set up the issue, and then we'll dive into some of the Jung and psychedelics.
Yeah, okay, sure. I mean, we can use a Four Noble Truths is a wonderful framework that works cross-culturally because it really is medical. It's like, what is the problem? What is the cause of the problem? Is there something that would resolve the problem? Is there a solution? And what's the path as a solution? I think this is a great formula for, especially for a dialogue like this. If you and I look around, I think we both agree, whether it be as close as the patient we're sitting with to our armchair view of society and culture, I think there's a breakdown that's happening, cultural, sociological, structural breakdown that's happening. And I think it's necessary. And I think there's a large evidence to support that this cosmic also, that there's, a great number of many traditions, wisdom traditions, have similar calendar or astrological perspectives on our time where we are in a sea change, a very, very well discussed and described sea change. You could call it the Piscean to the Aquarian. And in this sea change, structures break down. And whether those structures be the banking system that's breaking down, whether those are our confidence in political regimes are breaking down, the way we feed ourselves and our big agra and our big pharma are breaking down, our trust and tolerance of authorities breaking down, civil unrest and the deep opening of just how rife pedophilia and racism and a lot of dark shadow material are being exposed as the tectonic plates begin to rift. And at the same time, this is also creating opportunities for regeneration and for something new. So every system that's been disrupted is also now you're starting to see regenerative agriculture is coming in. The medical industry is turning to sound therapy, energetics, bioenergetics, meditation. Psychedelics are emerging for political political domains. New infrastructures are being put forth. New possibilities are being put forth for the banking system. You start to see Bitcoin and blockchain. So I mean, we're interested in a very cataclysmic and regenerative moment, and the same is true for the individual. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see somebody who feels dead inside, lost, apathetic, especially young millennials. They have very little hope about the future. They know they've been sold a lie, and they don't have an alternative. And they've been living in a concrete cinder block mega city, and they've been spoon-fed basically a paradigm or a mythos of materialism. And there's something missing, but they don't even know what that is. And they have been indoctrinated into a worldview that sees only their body, their brain chemistry, making a paycheck on an assembly line of some form or another, and a terminal death to look forward to. And I think just taking that step back and looking at like this is what we have in store for our civilization breeds a sense of discontent, whether we're conscious of it or not. It breeds a sense of being already dead, this kind of nihilism that's rife and basically all pervasive in the modern materialistic paradigm. And so, this is for me the problem. And I think, part of my training was to do CBT or like give prescribe, get the consult from the psychiatrist and prescribe a medication. And I think that's, as Krishnamurti said, just trying to adjust a sick person to a sick society. There's something that we're not attending to. Brilliant. We're just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're not addressing the fundamental root cause.
Let me push here. I have three. I'm fragmented, Miles. So I want to define modern materialism, and I want to define nihilism. So can we, because it's funny you said that, because I started to notice I was beginning to wonder about metaphysics, and that I was certainly attracted to this kind of Tibetan metaphysic that you get into. You reference cosmology and the quantum level and the way you talk about quantum is different than maybe some new age quantum, it has a real teeth, So, I want to define terms for anybody who needs to know that. Would you talk about materialism? Because it seems like that's one of the things you position as part of the problem, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
I mean, to take a step back, we're talking about worldview. Okay, and worldview is like the water that a fish swims in. Sometimes it's not that apparent. I mean, if I ask people, what's your worldview, they might not know what worldview they have, but everybody has a worldview. It's either been indoctrinated by culture, by society, family systems, or whatever. The worldview that we have as Westerns and even imported, as Westerners and even imported across the world, if you start with consumerism and you start with, where we are in a kind of modernism, is grounded in materialism, which is the belief that all there really is what can be perceived with the five senses. That is what is real. If I can touch it, it's real. If I can't touch it, I have no idea how to relate to it. If I can't see it, I have no idea. I don't believe, quote unquote, believe it's real. So we are reduced to a bandwidth of reality in the same way that maybe human beings can only see a fraction of the light spectrum. We have reduced ourselves to a bandwidth of viewing reality and therefore experiencing and interacting with reality that's merely materialistic. And because of that, you'll get phrases like, our scientific paradigm has reduced a human being when we don't have a definition for consciousness. We don't believe consciousness exists. We believe that consciousness in the current paradigm is an epiphenomenon of the brain. So the brain is primary. The brain is primary. The brain exists. It has these functions, and that's who you are. You are this body. You are this brain. And the brain and the body will die, and when we die, you will die. And so this is the connection between materialism or a materialistic paradigm or a materialistic worldview and nihilism. They actually are bed sisters, bedfellows. Nihilism is the view or belief that nothing essentially matters. As a result of seeing one in a terminal life perspective, as a result of seeing oneself merely as a constituent of matter, nothing matters. Because we're matter, because we're only matter, nothing matters. How about that? Mm-hmm. Because we're only matter, nothing matters. And this translates to the millennial experience. You got a young 25-something or 30-something that sees themselves in a terminal life perspective. They've got student debt up the hilt. There's no future job prospects. They live in a cinder block civilization. They can't even see a tree outside their bloody window. The pollution and the ecological demise or collapses all around them. And you're asking them, who are you? And what are you doing with yourself? And they have no answer because they have no mythology. Mm-hmm. Because the mythology they've been indoctrinated to is this material world for a very temporal time is all there is. And so you better get yours while you can. So you better play video games and make money and eat and shop and watch food porn or other kinds of porn and just indulge your senses. So hedonism is like a trifecta. Hedonism, materialism, and nihilism. They're all lumped in together. They're all, and I think this is a very general way of understanding the plight of our culture.
But couldn't it be said, because you check me on this, right? Like I go into a place of looking at not wanting to scapegoat on any kind of philosophical or interpersonal or tribal space. I tend to hear things like this in terms of this is human. This is what we do. We tend to have there's an individual tendency that seeks to understand, conceptualize, judge, categorize, to grasp the world of phenomena of matter and ideas and fantasies and feelings, and I want to incarnate it into this moment. And so that trend or tendency of our human experience carries a cost with it, which is that if we take that to its conclusion, then what we get is materialism and nihilism, and I like this relationship. So what concerns me sometimes is that we say, materialists, versus materialist. And that's what I think psychotherapy and kind of what your work by looking at these frameworks helps people understand is that we all have a lens, back to where you started. We all have a worldview, and let's start to question and query. It's so funny, this is the part of our conversation. I just did an episode on mythology and worldview. So this is great. I mean, and I think this is one of the reasons why we were both excited to chat, because there's a certain shared kind of philosophical underpinning that we're exploring, and now we get to see where we differ and what goes on in that space. So, right, how's that so far? Is there anything that you want to push up against?
No,
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. So, I guess I'm trying to figure out what, in your worldview, that you're talking about, you look at a Tibetan practice that has a worldview for you to understand reality. So your inherent tendencies toward the ego colonizing its experience doesn't overwhelm you and turn your life into a meaningless husk. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Cool.
And that's not also to suggest that a materialistic, reductionistic, scientific paradigm can't bear fruit.
Right.
I think that would be, in a way, a betrayal of all the values that we have created in the last 300 years through science. So I'm not an anti-scientist. I'm a scientist by training. I had to perform all the functions of a scientist. And when I'm sitting with a client, I think some sort of objectivity and analysis are really, really important. But I think even now, as we're in the pandemic with the anti-vax and vax, tension, I think you're also now seeing the beginnings of the breakdown of science, which is part and parcel of the archetypal and the astrological predicament that we're in, that we have, in a way, displaced religion and favored science over the last 300 years, and now science itself is also beginning to break down. It cannot solve every problem. It cannot conceive of every situation. It has its own inherent flaws. You can have as much research proving one thing, and then depending on your point of view, you could find research that contradicts it. And so, science, we have grown too reliant on knowing things from a scientific point of view. That doesn't mean that we should abandon it, but I kind of feel that it's time to open or expand the notion of what is possible, and that means multiple perspectives and multiple paradigms will have to coexist. And this at first creates cognitive dissonance that requires a lot of tolerance. The Newtonian paradigm and the quantum paradigm coexist. They don't neutralize each other. Mm-hmm. And so the world of the science that we've been used to has to find its way in a larger totality, which I think, from my point of view, because of my own bias, I think the Tibetans had a very accommodating worldview. And I don't think the Tibetans or the Tibetan Buddhists are anti-science. They have a very, very long lineage of reason, very sharp critical reason. But they don't also exclude the numinous. And the case in point I'll give you is that the Dalai Lama, who everybody loves and thinks is cute, sits on a throne and at one time served the function of a political theocratic leader, making worldly decisions for his people, and has been in recent times very, very accommodating for interdisciplinary dialogue among scientists. So there's been the biggest push of inclusion of science in Buddhism that has ever happened under His Holiness the Dalai Lama, up until including allowing his most adept meditators being used as guinea pigs in the brain research and the brain exploration. And yet, at the same time, in a different context, the Dalai Lama consults an oracle on the state board.
I was going to say that, man. I'm glad you went there. Yes. Seers.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in fact, if it weren't for his consultation with the oracle, he may not have left Tibet in time in a secret window of 3 days to pass the Himalayan pass into freedom.
Right.
So all I'm saying is they're not anti-science, but they also have a larger framework that's much more accommodating of other worlds beyond material, other considerations beyond the material.
So this is interesting because what I think Brian Marescu and a number of folks are getting into is, and certainly even myself, is this lack of tradition. I always thought I was going to find some deeply spiritual practice in a jungle in South America, and that's fine, or on the plains of Northern America. But there's a lineage here that goes back into the Greek and the Mediterranean areas, the Etruscans and the Ionians and that very much attended to the oracle. This is pre-Christian. This is
yes.
so that language system.
Now you're exciting me. You're heading into territory that is the most exciting for me right now. So keep going. Now you've got me.
Yeah.
Go on.
So and I'm learning Greek, and I have what I'm learning, looking at religious systems and magic, and not the ways in which that does or doesn't exist, but how have people in positions of power affected and changed the public perception of these kinds of mysterious, Dionysian kind of irrational spaces. And so where I hear your Western scientific paradigm, because we've turned science into the idol, as
into
opposed
the new religion.
as opposed to saying this is a method, guys. Let's we're using a method. Don't let it use us. And so underneath that, it has been some kind of a repression against ecstatic experience, against subjectivity. I want to read materialists. If they hang their hat on that, yes, that's what I am. I say, great, I want to read you because I want to figure out what's in your shadow, because I can learn more about my perspective too. So, and what tends to be in the shadow, as you said it earlier, with Dan Dennett's incredible work and the epiphenomenon. What does that thought thread take you to? And what it takes you to in a soundbite, which I understand it's just a soundbite, is that consciousness is an epiphenomenon. It's as a result of a collision of a network, and the lights just go on when a particular mathematical number of nodes binds together to form a network. And now I'm looking at like the panpsychic phi, this. So you said oracle, and then and that is quite frankly a metaphysical truth that I'm mining all over. So what excites you about that?
Oh, I've been, researching for a new book, and it combines the disciplines of, which is why I contacted you, Jung, Joseph Campbell, and Tibetan alchemy. Mm-hmm. And since we're currently amidst a psychedelic revolution, of course, Brian's book has been instrumental, and his passage of walking the pilgrimage of the Eleusinian mysteries all the way up to Christ as a kind of new torchbearer of the lineage, and then the shutdown, the church repression of this opportunity to taste the deathless, had me thinking, what is the connection between the mystery schools and the East?
Yeah.
And I started following the trail from the Ionian through Asia Minor up into the Hindu Kush. So we're in modern day Pakistan, and we're in Pakistan, Afghanistan now, where at one time Alexander the Great had created a number of Greco kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And you see statues of Dionysus there, and you see there the legacy of a viniculture where there was wine drinking and winemaking in this pristine valley called the Swat Valley. And it is in the Swat Valley that, from the Buddhist side and the Hindu tantric side, they believe is the birthplace for Buddhist Tantra. Mm-hmm. And the word ambrosia is very much connected with the Sanskrit amrita. They're both talking about a substance that gives access to the deathless state. And I'm researching how much influence there has been between the Dionysian or the Greek mystery schools and the Indian or the Indic tantric systems that come up around 6th and 7th, 8th century.
Right.
But my main thing is that I'm interested in the soul, because I think that's what we fucking lost.
Right.
And we're trying to revive the soul. And whether we do that by way of psychedelics that harken back through Brian's work to the mystery schools, or we do it through meditative culture, Indic meditative culture, or we find other avenues, what we have lost is what we're looking for, the soul, which can't be quantified by a magnifying glass in some lab experiment. And so it will require a re-envisioning of our paradigm in order to really access what I believe we're missing or what we've lost.
I had a weird thought about the dark retreat, which is something I've been interested by. So you're picking up on something that I've been wondering about, that in my Greek kind of magic exploration, I tend to also reference Tibet, what little I know. But what I do know, it stinks of this area. You're like, these people were doing something very similar. They were going into caves and they were, experiencing ecstatic, whether it was from starving themselves and having those kinds of vigilant practices to go, descend to Persephone, or it was a substance, or the cave of Trophonius is a place that I'm learning had an oracle, and you took viper venom. And I got to tell you, the first time, Amin Hillman is a guy I interviewed a while ago, and he's a powerhouse, and he says shit that people can't make sense of. He's like, he says the shit that people are like, they just reject it, right? But what he's doing is looking at how the human body was the apothecary, and that with these substances there were communion involved at times, bodily fluids, sexual unions, seminal fluids, vaginal fluid, menstrual blood, other kinds of salves that were that the antidote to a particular viper venom was cultivated through the vagina of an oracle, and I took it to a friend of mine who's an expert in this tradition, and I said, look, these people were doing some radical stuff. He's like, that's totally Tantra. He's like, they were doing that stuff then. Which we're getting to this intersection point of that's a common split for us, the East-West split. But what you're looking at is where they were the seat of this split.
Yes, and I there's no doubt from the researchers that I've talked to, Glenn Mullen, who's a 40-year Lama, Western researcher in Tibetan Buddhism, Ian Baker, also Dr. Ian Baker, another fantastic researcher and psychonaut, that sacred substances were in fact, and still probably very under the surface, still remain used in the Hindu and Buddhist tantric ceremonies. But more importantly, that lineage, when you talk about this apothecary, or you look at it as an alchemical crucible, the tantras now, from a more mainstream point of view, the body is the alchemical crucible, and the yoking of the internal winds in the crucible at 4 fingers below the navel, in the chalice, the drawing down of the winds and the drawing them up the central channel, the Sushumna, and how these are manipulated in order to release drops. These drops are not physical drops. These drops are energetic drops. They're symbolic. And inside those drops, particularly the one at the heart center, is what I think is the elixir of immortality. That's what the Holy Grail is. And that's what the Amrita or the ambrosia is. And I don't think these are mutually contradictory. I think if probably Brian continued the rigorous expedition that he started and continued east, I'm sure he would find remnants of a sacred substance, an actual substance. Like I think in the Swat Valley he would find it. I think that the Dionysian legacy just was incorporated. But then at some point, I think there also then became less physical and more symbolic, but not in the corruption or the rigid or restrictive way that he talks about the church sacrament of the Eucharist becoming idle. Like it doesn't create a potency. It's like a cardboard cutout version that doesn't give people an access to the numinous anymore. It's just rote and empty. I think the Tibetans, the psychonauts, they're practicing a very deep type of meditation that allows them access to the subtle body. And in that subtle body experience, they're able to manipulate their nervous system to gain access to these deathless states. When I say deathless, I'm using Brian's terminology there, immortality. Immortality is achieved by way of manipulation of the subtle nervous system. That's the legacy. That's the legacy of Tibetan, the tantric path.
So will you go into that a bit? That's a
well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really profound. I mean, I think, where I am personally is that I think the argument against this is that it takes too long and such a intensive training regimen. And I mean, Brian's work really shows that the average person could participate in the mysteries and with some very basic preparation could have that experience. And why would you deny a human being access to a state of immortality, which is their birthright? You could do that. The masses, unless you were a murderer or couldn't speak the language, you had access to it. Mm-hmm. Whereas the people that I've studied under, it's very secret. It takes a lot of time and preparation. My book, Gradual Awakening, represents 20 years of my initiation. The book, Gradual Awakening, is what is required to prepare even to get a tantric initiation. So if I was to ever write another book, it would be like the journey of the gradual path that I lay out in my book is really preparation for Tantra, at least in one lineage. And it's so intense because they realize that your mind is very, very susceptible. And this is where you and I as psychologists could have a discussion about the kind of structure that needs to be in place in order to have a profound breakthrough experience, whether delivered by substance or meditative experience. There has to be framework. There has to be preparation. Otherwise, something breaks down. Otherwise, a rupture won't take.
So this is a great question I've been thinking a lot about. Does it need to be esoteric and hidden?
In a way, yes, and in a way, no. I mean, these deep states and the subtle nervous system, the architecture within, if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. And there are plenty of people. Okay, I'm going to just take a step back. I'm sure in the last several years, people have come to you as a therapist saying, I've been down to Peru, I've taken ayahuasca, I've taken a big dose of mushrooms, and I'm all fucked up because I don't know how to deal with my mind or reality or where I am. Like, there is a considerable shadow to the psychedelic revolution that doesn't make it to Instagram.
Totally.
People are ill prepared. They have taken basically a vacation to Peru for 3 days, or they've gone to this center or that center. They've met a shaman that they've only just met that's all too willing to receive them for a 5-day ceremony, and then they're cast back into the world unprepared. Mm-hmm. And it's only grown in numbers, people that have had more disturbing experiences. Well, the same is true for people that I used to receive on the retreat end, who did very intensive 3-year retreat or very intensive meditative retreat and weren't ready, or didn't have this proper support, or couldn't actually make an integration back into society. One thing, as a pilgrimage leader, I lead pilgrimages, I give a lot of orientation for a departure, but it's actually the return that's much more difficult.
Right.
It's much more difficult to come home from the mountaintop than it is to ascend.
Yes, it is.
So,
hang on, because I want to get that. So we're talking about a mountaintop experience that is unique and a culture that doesn't support, and even worse, criticizes and diminishes with contempt those kinds of experiences. So, and that's what we see in adolescence, right? It's like I'm putting together a YouTube episode on sex and sexuality, and if you look up, this is sad. I don't need to laugh. If you look up areas of the country, let's just stick with the United States. If you look up counties in the country that are highest in teen pregnancies and teen STDs, transmissions, right? It's always correlated with conservative religious communities. So it's inherently based on repression. So rather than say to people, which is what I've done a lot, I talk to kids about sex. I go to schools and I talk to parents. I want to educate and help people understand, because I've sat with a lot of adults and children, and I'll ask them about their understanding of sex, and they're like, well, I don't know, like, and my parents never really told me, and I learned from the media or some. So we know there's an issue, but because we look at it through a worldview or a particular ideology, we see it through that lens rather than saying, shit, these kids are fucking, and they're doing it irresponsibly, and we should help them be more responsible. So we've got to talk to them about this power that they have, rather than let them go out into the world uninitiated. So and here we are in esoteric and hidden, because we have, well, maybe we do, and maybe what you're saying in the psychedelic movement is there's not been any kind of initiation. It's a cultural fad. You know, you read about Will Smith going to do ayahuasca, and it's like, well, fuck, Kim Kardashian had a great trip. How's mine going to be? You know,
and it brings us full circle with the. Sorry to interrupt you, but it brings us full circle with the view. This is the problem with the view. And what I mean by that is, if you have the materialistic view, you will go and extract mindfulness from Buddhism, and you will treat it like a technology, like a workout, expecting enlightenment. And you will go and extract ayahuasca from the deep lineage and worldview of the Amazon and expect profound breakthrough. But that's what we do. That's our legacy of colonialization and imperial extraction. We've just gone to the diamond mine in Africa and taken what we want and left the rest. And this is a problem with view, is that you have very yearning people looking for something that's not provided in their culture, but their indoctrination is so thorough that they think if they just take a 3-day trip to Peru or to Central America, or they do this or they do that, and they come home, it'll all be fine. What they're not doing is understanding that the very root of the problem is the view, and the view has to change along with everything else, not just your behavior. You're not just going to learn how to meditate for 15 minutes and it's all going to be fine. You have to change how you see reality. And having a breakthrough where you see reality for possibly the first time, but then going home where it's not reinforced, this is why you have such dissonance. And this is why people come to see you, John, and say, I'm having problems reintegrating after this profound experience.
Yeah, I think my brother said something after I had a pretty radical experience. And he said to me, true wisdom, he said, now your job is to remain loyal to your experience. What was revealed to you. And now you remain loyal to that, meaning that I take it seriously, that it's uniquely mine, that I don't have to query its existence because it's unquestionable. The only thing that makes me question the reality of that experience is this view. Right? Because I come back to it. I go from a dream, I'm totally in it. And then I wake up and my worldview comes back on. I go, oh, that was just a dream.
But you assume that being an isolate, your will is enough to combat the forces of culture. And I don't agree with that. I mean, even the strongest of us need mirroring and are
Yes.
susceptible to the mirroring of our culture and our family dynamics and our societies. So this is why Tantra is taught in crucible, in community, and in initiation. And that initiation doesn't just last a few days. You create micro communities, sangha, because the idea is that you're opening your mind. You've done your preparation so that your mind can receive this wisdom, but on the back end, you've created a microclimate so that you can nourish it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is one of the vital contributions of the Tibetan arts, because they've got the full. It's one of the last remaining. It would be like proponents of Elusis still alive now, saying, "Come and we'll show you." And you do the initiation. You get a long legacy of study. You have the initiation, and then you have the back end, all the preparation for the return, all in place, including a mentor, including community, including all the supports that you need, because there's an understanding that just sending someone into the profundities of reality and then casting them back as isolates into a world that doesn't mirror their recognition can create tremendous psychic disturbance and disequilibrium. Because nobody's going to mirror back for you what you saw. On the other hand, New Age movements, maybe I've never been to Burning Man, but I assume Burning Man is a tight-knit group of people because they understand they've all been through something common out there in the desert and they want to repeat it over and over again because there's that sense of familiarity and that sense of tribe and that sense of common value, and they want to do it, repeat over and over and over again, have this profound communal, religious, pseudo-religious experience out in the desert, and then create a kind of secret network or club to maintain the fervor of it.
Right.
The pushback I have with that, it's not all that deep philosophy. It doesn't run deep. It hasn't been enriched over the centuries through the conglomeration of repeated usage by human culture. And so
Okay,
what kind of, yeah.
Go into that for a second, because what I want to pull out of that is that there are inherent structures to communal spaces and that ethics are formed over time. But there are patterns and structures that exist. And I think what you're saying is that through a Tibetan tradition, these kinks have been worked out, at least as best they can for the time being. They've worked out all the kinks of how these deep existential, interpersonal, intrapsychic, symbolic structures are expressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the power of culture, is that through repeated trial and error, something is woven over time and maintained and passed on that reflects the profundity of the human mind. I mean, we're talking about immortality. We're talking about the soul. Could you imagine anything more complex to work out? And we're talking about 2,500, 3,000 years of legacy in order to really refine that. And that's what the psychonauts of the Buddhist culture have done. They did it very scientifically. They did their psychic exploration. First, there was the Buddha who had the breakthrough experience. I mean, we're talking about somebody, a human being, who had a breakthrough experience into the nature of reality and proclaimed he had discovered the deathless state, no longer bound to samsara, the cycles of stress and trauma, free. And then he spends, unlike Christ, who was murdered right away, spends 40 years delivering profound teachings and creating a network so that this experience could be reproducible. Which is where I think Brian's book did a real service, because he's showing like part of the repression was that the early church didn't want people to have such power. Mm-hmm. They didn't, because it would undermine the social structure of the institution. Whereas the Buddha wasn't murdered. He was free to roam in India. They were much more receptive to the message. There was much more inclusivity. You could have Jainism and Buddhism and Hinduism and various tantras all not vying for market share, but giving tolerance. The Buddha had 40-year run of teaching. And so the point is that in that time, he created networks where his teaching and institution were replicated. And then you have a long legacy of people that had this profound breakthrough. They had the Enlightenment over and over and over and over again. And when each successive member of the lineage has these experiences, they start talking about how they got there, what it was like, how it can be reproduced, how it can be refined, how the art of teaching it can be refined. Yeah. Where are the shortcomings? Where are the obstacles? Creating caveats and workarounds and medicinal salves for all of the dark recesses in the labyrinth of your mind where it could all go so wrong. I mean, the corpus of teaching is so enormous, but unlike your study of the Greek, where it's really, you'd be hard pressed to find a mystic these days in the Greek tradition, right? You could find a couple of them.
Yeah. I've been looking. Yeah. It's, would you talk about samsara?
Samsara translates as aimless wandering, as literal translation. Samsara, aimless wandering. And what it is the understanding that the nature of reality is perceptually based, that our perception of our view of reality is clouded or obscured. And as a result of blindness, as a result of not seeing reality clearly, we create karma or activities. Those activities then create manifestations. They create worlds unto themselves, and we remain mired in a cycle of stress and what Freud would call replication or repeating. So there's a sense that because of blindness, we're bumping up against the world and we're reacting, and as a result of our reactions, we perpetuate our misery. And this is what you and I do sitting down with clients. They come in with the presenting problem, and we both know the presenting problem is just the tip of the iceberg. We get deeper and deeper and deeper. Usually there's some kind of wound. There's some kind of child wound or systemic wound, and that wound has informed their perceptual lens. And as a result of this contaminated way of seeing, they are repeatedly repeating what it is that they already learned about themselves and the world and what's going to happen to them. They're in an unconscious process of replication. That much that Jung and Freud discovered is very congruent with the notion of samsara. Mm-hmm. Blindness leads to repeated cycles of misery. And therefore, illumination disrupts the cycle. You could say insight disrupts the cycle.
Yeah, and so in a way, our history is revealed to us in what we encounter in the present and the future.
Yes, and there's a wonderful Tibetan adage that says that. It says, you don't need to consult the soothsayer or the oracle. If you want to know your past, look at your current experience. Mm-hmm. If you want to know your future, look at your current action. I'll break it down for you. Mm-hmm. You don't need to go to an astrologer, although I do all the time. You don't need to consult the oracle, although if they were available, we should. But if you want to know your past, look at your current experience. What is arising in your experience now from a karmic point of view has been predetermined by what you have said, thought, and done in the past. If you want to know your future, look at your current action, because it is through your current action or your reaction to your current subjective experience that's laying down the framework and the building blocks for the person and experience they're going to have in the future. So in that micro moment between experience and reaction, you have basically karma theory. What's happening to you in this moment is the ripening effect of your past. How do I know that? You take any example and you say, if there were 10 of you having the same experience of a fire alarm, would you have the same subjective experience? And the answer is
no.
No. So whatever is arising in your little brain box is different from the person, even though it's the same scenario, the same context, and the same situation. The experience of the moment is being filtered. What is it being filtered by? Conditioning from the past. If you were in a fire as a kid, hearing a fire bell, or if you were in 9/11 during New York City and you that beautiful blue sky and the fighter jets flying overhead, or the sound of a fire engine, the associated links would create a tremendous upsurge of trauma and fear, whereas somebody else wouldn't notice that. They just see the blue sky and a aircraft moving overhead. So if you want to know your past, look at your current experience. It right here, right now, is the ripening effect of the things that you have said, thought, and done in the past. If you want to know your future, look at how you react. Now, most of us react to our subjective experience in the same way. It's become automatic. If I feel ashamed, I will isolate. That's my story. As soon as I feel ashamed, I isolate. Well, if I isolate, what happens? No one sees me. And if no one sees me, I don't get support. And if I don't get support, the shame stays alive. It can't get disrupted. It stays in momentum, in play, like a wheel in spin. So if you want to know your past, look at your current experience. Someone doesn't. So you send out an email and you don't get a reply. It's just a non-reply. That's what the situation is. What happens to some people?
Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get a text within 10 minutes. What happens to people? They're replaying a story that they've already lived. Someone doesn't love me. Somebody doesn't care about me. I've been abandoned. I did something wrong. Then how do they react? What do? They get angry. They send a firing email, or they, get needy and clingy. Where are you? Where are you? Then that person receives the clingy, needy email, and what are they inclined to do as a result of your neediness?
Withdraw.
Back the fuck off.
That's right.
And when they do that, it reinforces the abandonment syndrome all over again. Mm-hmm. That's samsara.
Yeah, and so there's the kind of Freudian approach where we look to the history and we see where we reduce it to my wound. And what I liked about Jung and what he was looking at, he said, in relationship to all this stuff, my environment, my relationships, my intrapsychic world, my experiences, my tendencies, my view, my time of birth, all that stuff, that our trajectory in our future is limited by particular patterns in relationship to the way that reality functions and the way that humans behave, or the way we think. We think we have this infinite amount of choice, but it's really like this is how I'm going to behave. So that becomes a pattern or a force by which I orient my life. And then my me-ness, my unique soul, is taken over by this agenda or this need. And so I'm not the human multiplicity that I am. I'm this reality, and that I can get caught in a cycle of that reality and not be aware of it. Right. Okay.
Well, keep going. Teach me a little bit about what Jung was talking about with the self.
So, yeah, that is it. I mean, there is some kind of an essence that he called. You made a reference about it. He said at some point it's the center point and circumference, and that gets into a paradox, which sounds a lot like no self. So this essence, this out of this vessel, it is filled with substance, but the vessel itself is patterned. If any kind of vessel, line up all the different kinds of vessels and they all look very different, but they have a function, this is the crucible or the container. And the self is the container wherein all the magic happens. And then he structured his psyche in relationship to the outer world, the inner world, the ego, the shadow, the archetypes, which are on some level envisioned, which he said the self and the ego and the shadow are somewhat archetypal as well, that there are these, for me, they're equated to a riverbed. There's this riverbed and it's filled and it's dependent upon my biology, my environment, my psychology, my spirituality, and that gets filled with some kind of content. But the archetype itself is filled with our personal experience. But what he's saying is that the archetype, mother, father, so on and so forth, is a need. What we see in our clinical practices is somebody says, my dad never did this. He never took me out into the wilderness, or he never taught me how to do finances, or my mother never gave me any affirmation, or it was overwhelming to me, was overly needy and dependent because she was anxious, and so she intervened on me in ways that didn't allow me to have my own development. So I have this inherent need of mothering or fathering, and we know what happens when people don't get mothered or fathered, and that's different culturally, right? Like I'm not going to say there's any one way to do it, except for I would say that one way to do it is to give your presence and attention when the child needs it, and don't give it when the child doesn't need it. So that vessel is this self. It's this kind of cohesive idea of this is the place where all this stuff happens. Mm-hmm. And what do you hear in that from your lens?
So I hear that it's a totality. It's an openness. And it doesn't negate ego. It doesn't negate shadow. It allows for them.
Right.
But if you don't have that openness, then you are constricted and defined by ego. You are constricted and defined by shadow. If you can break through to the totality or the openness, there's much more play, let's say. There's much more give. There's much more possibility. There's much more malleability. So that, I think, I'm not a scholar of Jung, but I would say the concept of emptiness in Buddhism provides very much the same kind of breath of fresh air, the same kind of malleability or malleability is really a great word. Shape-shifting reality, shape-shifting personality, shape-shifting experience is the hallmark product or byproduct of one's intuitive understanding of emptiness. Without emptiness, there's only rigidity and reactivity. With emptiness, there's creative flexibility. There's knowing how to respond. There isn't an obliteration of the self. I think this is one of the big misconceptions of emptiness. Emptiness misunderstood is nihilism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Emptiness understood correctly is relativity.
Okay, say more about that.
So you have a duality. You have ultimate truth and you have relative truth. Relative truth is where most of us exist. We live in the world of intersecting experiences, people, places, and things that we can brush up against and have experiences with. Then there is ultimate reality, which is if you look closely at any one of those things, they all dissolve upon analysis. You can't find them. You can't identify any one of those things. So it's like you take a supercharged trip into the quantum layer of reality where you see that things are mostly space. Okay? But if you take it too far into mostly space, you can go off a deep end and you can start saying and thinking that nothing exists. Oh, it's mostly space. And this happens in the spiritual community as a major spiritual bypass. If people have a breakthrough Kensho experience and they see that they're selfless, then they start going, well, what does anything matter?
Right.
If you start hearing, what does it matter? Oh, the tsunami in 2006, what does it matter? It's all empty. It's all an illusion. You get these Advaita Vedanta people who misunderstand things, and they start going, it's all an illusion. What are you so upset about? The wars in Afghanistan, the starvation. What are you reacting to? It's all an illusion. That's fucking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a misunderstanding of things. That's going too far to the extreme of emptiness until you hit a event horizon called nothingness and misunderstand that to be the truth. Well, the same is true on the other side. You can think that reality is exactly as it appears. The computer is exactly as it appears. It's substantial in itself. Myself is exactly as I appear. I'm a 46-year-old man. And that has its own craziness too. So what the Buddha discovered was what's called a middle way, where you take from the extremes the truth without the tendency to go overboard. And I like this image. I think this image is really helpful in understanding true non-duality. If you had a fan, like a fan, and it was one of these very, very thin Chinese rice paper that's so thin that it's almost transparent. You can lucidly see the sunlight and the forms through it. And on one side you had conventional reality, and you turn the fan on the other side, you had ultimate reality. You have form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. And actually, if you stopped it and you saw form from the form side, you could get to the emptiness. And if you turned it around and from emptiness, you'd have to come back into form. And so how this equates with the Jung model is that spaciousness, the emptiness, is actually a womb that's pregnant with possibility. Shunyata karuna garbham. One of my favorite Sanskrit quotes from the literature. Shunyata, emptiness. Karuna, compassion. Garbham, the womb. Emptiness is not a blank canvas. It's not a blank cave. It's a womb of possibility. Starting to feel a little bit like what you were saying Jung was talking about, but the notion of self. When you have that womb of possibility, then you have a much more dynamic relationship to the ego. The ego, there's nothing wrong with the ego. Why would you ever want to get rid of the ego? Your ego's sitting over there, dapper jacket, you've got a nice trim beard, you play guitar, and you're a technician in your podcast. You're your own sound master in your podcast, and you're an explorer of Greek and a therapist. I love that. And you have wife and kids, and that's where your self is expressing itself. But if you didn't have the openness, you'd be stuck in all your rigid patterns. But if you had that access to spaciousness, you could undermine your patterns. You could work with your patterns. You could create new ones.
You had because you actually hit on my main question, which was about some of these choices that we make in metaphysics. That, okay, well, are we at a blank slate? Well, no, we've established that, no blank slate. So when you're in a Western academic territory and you're saying we're no blank genetics, and we come intrinsically potentiated with the as James Hillman talks about, he says that the acorn will become an oak tree. Mm-hmm. Like, I have some kind of patterned form that is unique, and it's present in the at conception and in the womb. And on some level, and this is where Jung was getting, on some level, my life is a flowering and a lived experience of accepting the invitation to allow for that unique soulful part of me to become fully expressed. Mm. And to your point earlier, and to work that out in culture, because I can't just be distracted by sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which I've recently heard as a phrase that really dates me, and but I still use it. So because that's your anhedonia and adonia split. You were referencing adonia earlier, and then anhedonia. What is happiness? What is satisfaction? What is a good life? What are our questions that we continue to all in every culture ask ourselves? How should I live? How should I be? How can I flourish? What is fruitful? What is unique? What is soulful?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can agree on this. That we agree on a lot. But what I'm coming to understand is that from my lineage, when I hear a term of nothingness, or I guess emptiness, or no self, it offends the ego, rather than saying, no, if you go to quantum, which is our theory that's currently, it's when we say quantum, it's an understanding of a deeper aspect of reality that's based upon our capacity to image and understand aspects of reality that aren't imageable, and so we say, okay, we'll take that to a conclusion, and one day it'll be expanded even more. But what we do know is that there's this libido, or essence, or chi, or energy that for all these multidisciplinary experiences in our life starts to take on form, and the form is informed by its experience. But the no self, or the emptiness, is that there's no intrinsic or inherent value statement of what that is at the beginning or in the vessel.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just had a good insight.
And then, but you have to take it one step more, which is that emptiness is always combined with what's called bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is from the relative side. So you have the emptiness, which is the openness. If you don't like emptiness, say openness, or potentiality, or the quantum field, or the
Totally.
the wave-like structure. But then from the conventional side, you have bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, the altruistic resolve. It's defined as the spirit of enlightenment. Bob Thurman's translation: spirit of enlightenment, the altruistic motivation. So first, I think we have to take a step back to our four noble truths framework. We did the problem, we discussed the etiology. Part of the solution is that I think we're both agreeing between the lines here that there is a multi-life continuity. Mm-hmm. I think this is what's missing, and I think this is, in my work, this is what's really important. Some of the teachings that I do with my students is opening the mind to the possibility of a multi-life continuity of consciousness. This has always been a given in Tibetan Buddhism. It's essential. Mind and body are different. The mind continues. It's immaterial. We could call it soul. There is a soul. It's not a fixed, permanent thing. It's a changing flux of continuity. It transcends the body. It goes into multi-life, a multi-perspectival experience. What's important is that soul be aligned with a strong motivation or principle of altruism. This is what gives the soul purpose. The thrust of the soul is to see itself as an agent of change for oneself and others. That's the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to recognize that you're a soul and to claim that soul and to become and to use experience to illuminate your soul and to align yourself with the possibilities, the altruistic possibilities of that soul. So if you say floating around in the archetypal realm of Jung's model is the savior, mm-hmm. as one archetype. And the idea...
We could also say an image. It's an image. And that I think gets us into this linguistic territory. And that's kind of what I'm hearing, is there is this image in... Again, this is like one of the things that Amen has said to me before. The image, there's a physics that the image is related to and entangled with. The Savior will manifest in different cultures. It's transcendent of a transpersonal, transdimensional, and the image manifests at meaningful moments and is empowered in meaningful ways. And this goes back to what was happening in the Greek territory when they would say things like, we think we have ideas, but ideas have us. And that, I think, is what this is. These structures can sometimes have their ways with us, have their way with us. And we have to figure out how we surrender or how we
inhabit
struggle with it. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So the
You're on altruism. Sorry.
Well, there's this relationship between the quantum openness and then aligning. The most constructive use of precious human life, they say, is to discover one's openness and then to align with purpose, this altruistic purpose. This is the end game. This is the end game of Buddhism, is to discover what you're not, but then through that discover what you truly are. You are that openness, incarnate. There's no other place than here. There's no netherworld. There are many worlds, but you're always going to be inhabiting some character. Mm-hmm. So what's the best character? Mm-hmm. Well, he's sitting right in front of me. But he's driven by the nectar of bodhicitta. He can have 2 kids, be a therapist, love rock and roll, and he will be perfectly aligned with his soul's purpose if at the very root of it, he's motivated by love and compassion. Mm-hmm. And I think there's no difference here between what Apotheosis and Christ were trying to do. You are Christ. Taste the nectar of immortality and perform the dance of being the Savior so that others might also taste the same nectar. That's Buddhism. Except it was never repressed so that there's only one Dalai Lama and you have to bow to the Dalai Lama and ask for forgiveness. And if he puts his wand on top of your crown, then you'll be free. No. The idea is you're the Buddha. And you have Buddha nature within inside of you. And if you can get past all the layers of certainty that you're not, you can taste that soul level, and then you can manifest it as a kind of archetypal personality that actually has tremendous galvanizing power for the rest of collective consciousness to do the same kind of formula, the same kind of awakening dance. And you can do that in business. You can do that as a teacher in an educational setting. You can do that as a police officer. You can do that as an artist. It doesn't matter. In fact, more the better. So that all society is refracting this same kind of principle. You are a soul and love beings. You are a soul, love beings.
You're articulating a split that's pretty common. And we see it. We don't have to go far from the root of our conversation, which is psychedelics. One of the roots. Because here, you pick your duality, Jung and Freud. We have one in the psychedelic world, which is Huxley and Leary. And so this is back to this question about esoterics.
Give me the benefit that I might not know that Huxley Leary split. Give me a nutshell.
Nutshell is that Huxley says, well, let me start with Leary. Leary's like, let's take LSD and put it in the water supply. I mean, this is about like freeing people from the fucking matrix. And he's a radical. And he's like, fucking dose, yes, healing, exploration. No, just make it happen. He's like such a radical energy, and wants to just throw the power systems out and really disrupt society and social norms because he wants everybody to trip on LSD. Huxley was saying, wait a second, this is for a kind of those who have been initiated. This is for folks who have honor, who recognize the paths that are present, and that you can't just medicate somebody with high doses of LSD. Maybe you can, but then and expect that they will naturally just know how to orient themselves. So here's a question that
yes. I mean, that's a kind of a conservative progressive binary.
Totally. We see it everywhere, and I wish we could like
Well,
recognize.
you find the middle. You got to go for the middle. You've got to go for the middle. I mean, this is the problem with our polarization in our current American political landscape, is that the left doesn't understand the right and the right doesn't understand the left. But each of them are holding on to a pretty good value.
Yes.
There's some powerful value in conservatism. There is really something to say about
Absolutely.
preserving the sanity and the legacy of the past, and there's something about autonomy and preserving speech and the right to this and the right to that. Because in their particular context, that was all really fucking vital. On the other hand, if if institutions don't progress, if institutions don't change, and if institutions don't evolve, then they become prisons. And so, of course we have to adjust with the time. Of course we have to move forward. Of course it's time for every human being on the planet to have the same basic human rights and dignity. Of course. Now, you do that too quickly, and you get some pretty crazy ideas. Pretty unhinged and dangerous ideas, I might add, though I won't probably say exactly which ones. But yeah, so there's a shadow to both, but there's also an inherent utilitarian virtue in each. And what could we do is bring a conversation to the middle where there can be a nuanced conversation about how to integrate both sides. Because I think, I don't know about you. I would say my personal disposition is center conservative. Like, I don't think everybody should just be massively dosed up. Right. On the other hand, I know what Leary is saying, because the fucking world is crazy. Let's get out of the matrix, of course. So, it's like, that's a wonderful rubric at a conceptual level, but it would take a really intense series of conversations to get more specific and nuanced and detailed in particular about what a hybrid or an integration might actually look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what a friend of mine recently challenged me with, because earlier you said, you are the Christ, you are the Buddha, you have this potential, down in the recesses in this pool of, muck, and it is the underworld. It's when I watch these these awesome One Strange Rock is just a freaking brilliant show that Aronofsky did, and you see the beginning of the earth, and it's this lava and mush and algae and shit. Well, that's in us, right? This place of potential. And what can happen is that when we all have this potential, and I think, let me get to the statement and then we'll unpack it. The potential to realize the Godhead within is inherent, ontologically speaking, in each person. But epistemologically, epistemologically, it can't be true, because not everybody can incarnate the Godhead. Does that make any sense?
Not everybody at any one moment or any given moment can. Yes, I would agree with that, because that's because of the forces of karma. So you have Buddha nature, you have unlimited potential to be a completely awake human being, understanding the full totality of the nature of reality, your interdependence with all things. But because of the forces of causes and conditions, you can't just access that and manifest that at any moment. You have all kinds of obscurations, patterns, samskaras, tendencies, predispositions that will obscure it, that will prevent it, that will augment it, that will give you slight little windows to it. And even if you take a massive psilocybin expedition and you touch the nature of ultimate reality, you will still have to come back to the matrix of your conventional reality. And until that is transformed, then you can fully, and that's what they would say the archetype of Christ or the Buddha actually represents, as someone that has brought the totality into the manifestation, or the avatar into the field of relativity.
Yeah, because sometimes I just want to paint the fucking fence. I don't, like embodying the Godhead, and being all these deeper. It's like sometimes I just want to chop
But
wood, carry
what's
water.
to say that embodying the Godhead isn't painting the fence?
That's what I thought. Yes, I get that.
This is where they say those Zen koans that you know of. When drinking tea, just drink tea, and that is enlightenment. That is enlightenment. And that's because it's trying to destroy your conceptual understanding that it would be anything other than drinking tea or painting the fence.
Okay, so I'm looking at our time, and I want to be mindful. I still have a.
We're going to have to have another one. I'm going to have to come to Houston.
Yes, I'm totally down. So tell me about. I'm still thinking about the Oracle and this Eastern, Western.
Yeah, that's my favorite part.
Connection.
My favorite part.
So tell me why the Dalai Lama meets with an oracle. What is it in? What is the nature of reality that sets up an oracle as somebody that one would turn to?
Yeah, can you imagine how fabulous it is to, on your political cabinet, have an oracle? In modern
with a funny
times,
hat,
in modern times, yes, with a funny hat. Yeah, the Nechung oracle occupies a political position in the cabinet of the Tibetan government. Yes, in exile. Yes, it's true. Yes, it's true. Anybody that because they have a vast notion of reality that is completely internally consistent. They understand that they need roads and plumbing for their people, and that for those kinds of things, health and vaccinations and all the rest of it, and for that, science is perfectly reasonable up until a point. And then they also see that reality is much vaster, and for that other terrain, there needs to be psychonauts that can speak that language and can draw in a collective kind of gnosis or understanding that is only tapped with that kind of professional, with that kind of, when you have a car accident, you go see a lawyer. You don't try to handle your business. If you get sued in your business, if you get sued by a client, you're not going to try and handle that yourself. You need a specialist. When
you go to a seer or an oracle, so let's go at this because there are two ways, right? I've been looking at this image of an oracle, and part of the process is that you take a viper venom, you crawl through a deep, dark cave, scorpions and snakes, and any of us can understand that we would be met with some pretty horrendous experiences, just that are patterned. They won't be the same thing, but if I take a viper venom and I crawl through a cave, I'm going to meet some demons. Now what that means is up for debate, right? Like, is it just it's vampires that I see in my closet when I was a 5-year-old, or is it something else? So what this process involves is you go through, take the thing, go through, encounter the whatever you do, come out, take the antidote, report to the oracle, and then there's a kind of treatment plan. There's like hey, this is what you do. And so that's a certain psychotherapy.
That's what psychotherapy could do.
Yes,
that is psychotherapy, yeah.
And
that's why I think Campbell and Jung are really powerful for what you're describing, to really understand and appreciate that level of ritual or that level of initiation or that level of sacred practice. Jung and Campbell, the combination, would really help us make sense of what's going on, because there's a descent into the underworld and there's the confrontation with the archetype. But in confronting the dragon or the demon, it's energy. It's energy that has been bound up or calcified, and it can be released. And that takes a very deep kind of knowing. And this idea that every dragon protects a treasure. Mm-hmm. And the dragon represents that which we don't want to deal with. That which we're afraid of. It could be trauma. If you run from your traumas, they get bigger.
Yes.
And more insidious and more powerful and more terrific. And the more terrific they are, the further you run away from them. Until somebody gives you an option, or until you're willing to crawl back down into the recesses of your mind through that thorny tunnel and have a confrontation or a sit down with that dragon, you think it's an other, but it's you. Mm-hmm. And through recognizing it's you, the fear is diminished. And whatever it has to teach you, whatever, you're reincorporating it. And this is one thing I love about the depiction of Christ in the 3 days after the crucifixion. He also makes a descent into the underworld. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there he connects with all the old souls, including his parents, I believe, or it could be Adam and Eve, all the old souls. And what he's doing in those 3 days in the underworld is he's recollecting all that he is. Because these are all fragments and shards and fractures of the self that now appear as different entities in which we have these conflictual feelings about. We see them as other. But Jung's notion of the self is the integration of the totality of the self, and the Christ descends, before he arises, he first descends and reclaims them.
Help me understand this then, because there's one little hitch in that, and which is Jung, and I think as evidenced by a lot of certainly the psychotherapeutic work that we probably both do, there is an autonomy to some of these figures. You know, I like the image of a pen light, you know, so I go into the dark cave and I've got a pen light, and when I put the pen light this way, I can see that, but I don't see that. The totality of existence is in me, which is to say the totalities of potential and possibilities exists in me, and in some way have various forms that I can relate with in moments of ecstatic experience, sexual experience, trauma, psychedelic experience, fantasy, daydreams, projections, who I hate, who I love, who I'm drawn to, who I'm despised by. And that they are a kind of other, and that if my kind of interior representation is that me is the ego, and there are others that are in me that are beyond my ego, but they're in me. You know, they're in my, yeah. So what do you,
Again, it requires us to not obliterate the duality between form and emptiness, or ultimate and conventional. Ultimately, there is no difference. Mm-hmm. They're all the self. Conventionally, they manifest as other. Mm-hmm. If you don't see that as one thing, you're going to get lost and confused, thinking that they're totally other or totally just me. Right. The extremes. The middle way is it requires a lot of tolerance for cognitive dissonance. They're both. And neither. We're back to the Zen koan. But yeah, the enemies that are within are parts of us that haven't been fully integrated. The father figure that abused you is both an external entity, we have to say yes, and is an internalized representation of the self that you can't accept. And look, if we don't be very clear about social justice, for example, highly traumatized people who then come into power can be abusive themselves, for example, because they haven't totally integrated the parts of themselves that they despise, and that what we despise we project outwards. Yes. So this is why you can have abused become abuser. We see it all the time. Mm-hmm. Kids that are abused, how do they become abusers? Because they haven't fully come to accepting all the parts of their trauma as parts of themselves. They externalize that, and they replicate with a lot of vengeance and a lot of heat and a lot of animosity. They create division. So it's both and. When Christ was down there, these other external agencies, at one time they're different souls, and at another, in the very same moment, they are part of him. This is what they say. I've never experienced it, but this is what they report the experience of the Buddha is that a complete synergy between ultimate and relative. At the very same time as I experience you as part of me, I also experience you as separate. At the very same time. What could that be like? That means that I would have the subjectivity of experiencing reality from your set of vantage points. And I would have deep empathy and deep sensitivity. But I wouldn't lose myself in you. I would preserve the distinction and yet have a complete subjective sense that you are me, and our interests are mutually indistinguishable. I basically live in the world protecting your values and protecting your sanity and protecting your autonomy because I see you as me. But I also know that you're different. I mean, it's radical. It's radical. But to come back to this idea of going into the cave and taking the venom that you're talking about, I mean, the potency of those images and crawling through the birth canal and then arriving at this place where you see the demons. Yes, I mean, I think if you ask anybody who's been through an enormous trial, whether it be successful trauma therapy, or they've done a psychedelics experience for the first time and survived, or they've done a dark retreat or a 10-day Vipassana retreat, most likely, not everybody, most likely at the other end of it, they have found the victory of confidence or the victory of insight. And they don't look back and look at the problem that they confronted the same anymore. Mm-hmm. Whatever you were afraid of before you took psychedelics, likely you're not afraid of the second time. Whatever happened to you in the dark retreat, the fear that was bound up in your projection about what it would mean to be 10 days in darkness is reabsorbed as your own confidence. It's the same energy. It's just like fear and love are just energy, but they have been recruited in the service of different activities. Love and anger, for example, at its most basic state is just energy, but it gets bound up and calcified as different kinds of experiences. Mm. So fear, when faced, is unlocked and unleashed and can be then serviced as love or insight. So maybe that's what happens when you climb out of the cave and you go visit the oracle, or at the Asclepion, they would have priests after the incubation that would give you a kind of practice, or they would give you an interpretation. This may be actually the foundations of dream analysis, the Asclepion in Greece. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can't make sense of everything that you see in your dream, or maybe you couldn't make sense of everything in your underworld experience, or maybe you couldn't make sense of everything in your psychedelics experience, so you need a trained professional to help you really taste the nectar of your heroic journey.
And we need to speak it and honor it in a way that takes it seriously. Okay, so I get, and we've got to go in a few minutes because I got a patient, but so I get this part, right? I'm in the cave. I encounter the demons. I go to the oracle. I got all these kind of fragmented parts of myself that Jung called splinter personalities that take on some kind of autonomy, and they haunt me and interact and abscond with my best of intentions and make me act all kinds of ways that I look back on and go, what the fuck was that? And what we were talking about a second ago is a fucking oracle who says, hey, leave this place because the warriors are coming.
Yeah.
That's different than that. That's where it gets into weird shit about entanglement and how are you reading the tea leaves and seeing an outcome.
But that's why I say, like, that's the difference between a therapist and a news reporter or a weather reporter. Okay, the person that helps you outside of the womb to integrate is the therapist or the shaman. Mm-hmm. But if you want to know the weather, you go see a meteorologist. Well, the Dalai Lama wanted to know when the best opportune window to escape was, so he went to see somebody who could see that. He could see into the future. He could identify the opportune time.
That's where it gets awesome.
It's so awesome.
That's where it gets really cool. And that's the kind of material that I think people are confronting when they engage in these kind of psychedelic experiences in a healthy way with the container, and is they recognize that reality has more possibilities than you once thought. And that revelation, to hint, to even suggest from within that as a potential of reality can be utterly disorienting to one's understanding of who one is and what the world is.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, that's why I think preparation is really important, because you don't know what you're going to see at the top of the mountain. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. And you might not be able to make it back down after seeing it. So preparation beforehand, preparation while you're there, preparation on the way down. That's at least the most gentle, gradual. That's why I wrote the Gradual Path, because, but I don't condemn people who want to just, a 20-year-old that's never had any experience that wants to go down and just obliterate their mind. But I'll be there for them. I'll be there for them, you know.
And they'll need you. Right? They need what you do. It was Jung or Campbell or Jim Hollis that said, when we don't have the landmarks, we have to go at it alone. And back to our initial conversation is that's an isolationist experience. And we've been doing this project called Humanity for a long time, and that's no good, because what we also do is the worst punishment other than death that we can give you is to isolate you. Cut you off from that feedback that we were talking about. Well, Miles, thank you. Like this is one of those enriching experiences. I really appreciate your time and what you're doing to elucidate all these ideas.
I think it was a really rich conversation that I'd love to enjoy continuing to converse with you and collaborating with you. For me, it was a wonderful opportunity just to get to know you and to sort of feel through the way you think, and to see how rich all the diverse, disciplines that you're integrating. For some of them are really brand new, so it's been really enriching for me. Thank you so much, and I will take you up on it. I'll be knocking on your door again, because it's a long conversation. It's what Phil Cousino called the long discussion. So it's meaningful, rich, and enduring discussion, because these are very complicated themes. And what else do you want to do with your life?
Oh man, I know, and I'm such a student. I'm like an enthusiastic, excited, eager student. I just love these questions. So thank you for the opportunity to connect and get to know you. It's a pleasure. Control.